Hello, everyone. Welcome to Type Talks. Today, we're here to talk about the ESFP and ESTP type and how their function stack really looks like when you account for nurture. And so, cultural, family dynamics, workplace situation can all influence how our stack develops. And from Dario's research, from analyzing his keys to cognition assessment, he sees that there are two main cognitive function stackings that appear in the results of this data. So if you want to learn about Dario's wisdom and insights and his analysis of the over 200,000 data points that he's collected, we'll tune in for today's video. And so, thank you, Dario, for joining us today. Would you like to share a little bit about yourself or?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit more about where the data comes from and the analysis for those of you who might not have seen the other videos. That this comes out of the Keys to Cognition online site. And even the clean data set is now over 200,000 people. And Dr. Mina Barmani and her colleagues at Johns Hopkins University have been doing statistical analysis on this and working it up. And the assessment, by the way, I should emphasize, is not, it's like an 8 functions assessment. It's not a Myers-Briggs type preferences assessment. And we're just asking people to rate each function distinctly, separately, so we're able to see what function stacks actually show up. And we're asking people for skilled use. So this really is a picture of development. So this doesn't necessarily undercut like what we would say is like the ideal or the theoretical model. And certainly we're talking about functions playing in all different roles. And I've been talking to Mina, she's like, I don't know if all the results we get for people are necessarily like ideal for them, but it's how they figured out how to manage their lives. And just think about it, for those of you, regardless of what type you are, you're probably aware as you've learned the functions or as you even just learn the preferences that society is like very STJ and SFJ. And we all have to stretch to meet that to some extent. We all have to get through a 12 years school system and like all of these things. Probably, even if you're intuiting type, you pretty good chance you had sensing parent or parents. And then we also have development. That's the magic and the beauty of type. Its strength is that it's a developmental model. So at the same time that we have to like sort of be like, here are my preferences and this is what I'm good at and my strengths. And but wait, the culture is asking for this other thing. And then there's a third thing, which is about like, and I'm also on a journey of development. So what we're getting here is a picture of the ways that people develop. And for each of the 8 functions, for people who have those as dominant, there are definitely, they break down in most cases really clearly in terms of, say, ESFP or ESTP, that there are these what are statistically called classes. And that covers about 85% of people. And then there is 85% of people are going to fall into these 2 classes. And then there's another 15% of people who are just like, yeah, my life is weird. Like my development is weird. And those are not generally statistically significant enough to show up because they're just like people who are little dots all over the map. And then there are these 2 main clusters. Extroverted sensing is a little bit different because one of those little clusters, we're called tiny clusters, was actually just big enough to like pop in as its own class. So we're going to talk about 2 kinds of ESTP today and 3 kinds of ESFP, keeping in mind that that third ESFP is actually really, really small group, but is still there enough to show up. And I think I've met a couple, not one, but at least 2 in my life versions of this ESFP. This like rare, but they show up ESFP. So that's like the broad overview.
Yeah, I appreciate the nuance in this model. And so we'll be seeing the rare ways a type can show up. Schooling can definitely influence a person's manifestation of their type. We're all taught to behave a certain way, and that definitely does ingrain itself in our psyche. So the collective unconscious, unconscious, I'm not saying this right. That Carl Jung talks about. That's as correct as I'll say it. So
It's a regional accent. We'll call it that.
yes, it's my regional accent. It is it shows up in a way where it influences our personality type. And so, before we get into the nitty gritty information and talk about the types, Dario and I would like to show you guys about a weekend retreat that we're really excited to tell you about. And it's on Jung's holistic teachings. And so, Carl Jung talked way more than just about personality types. That was just one chapter of his book, Psychological Types. And so, he actually was really into a lot of Eastern practices and other things as well too. And so yoga, qigong, shamanism, there were things that he would explore and try to understand and see the value of and incorporate in his own practice. If you want to experience the kind of embodied practices that Carl Jung himself did, then come to Jung for Life, where Dario and I, we will show you these practices. Dario has been studying this for so long. He has really delved into Carl Jung's work in extensive detail, and he's here to distill all of that into NI themes and the main core exercises that you can bring home. So, what are you waiting for? Dario, do you have anything you'd like to share about it?
Not a lot, really. I love the points that you covered, that type was one chapter in one book, that Jung went to India and he came to the Southwest in the US, that he was very interested in all of these other topics. He developed this practice called active imagination. So we're going to be doing a lot of embodiment activities that really benefit from being in person. Otherwise, these would be video courses, but they can't be video courses because that's not how they work. And the first day is a little bit more like introspective and working with yourself, body, mind, emotions, spirit. The second day is more relational in nature. And then the third day, or like half day, is focusing on the type questions, which I think people, they're listening, they have a passion with type. So they, of course, they want to hear about that too. And those are, I'm really looking forward to the New York event. As we're recording this, is like pretty much full, and we still have Chicago down the line, and then we'll see how it goes for next year. But I'm really excited to be offering this again, and of course to see Joyce again too, and to hang out together, and we're gonna let the magic happen in the beauty of Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah, and also in Chicago too. And Dario will also be paying for our lunch as well. And he has all these books that he can sign for people who join. There's so many Easter eggs, so many bonuses you get with joining. So if you want to meet us, if you want to talk with us, if you guys have had any dreams about meeting your favorite MBTI people that you've met over video, this is the time to make your dream reality. You know, Carl Jung talked about dream work, and so this might be serendipitous fate for you. So come, please join us. All right, and so that brings us to ESTP. I'd love to learn about your breakdown of the function stacks and your thoughts on this type.
Sure. So there's two main classes, and I'll talk about what I think we could call the holistic version of ESTP first. This is really like a classic ESTP. So of course they have high extroverted sensing. They have high also extroverted feeling and extroverted thinking, and of course introverted thinking. So this is really the classic piece that we see across all of the types in the data. And we're talking like over 200,000 people, what Mina calls the tricycle model, where the first, the second, the third, and the sixth functions are what the person is really focused on in terms of their skills development. So they're very active, they're very responsive in the moment, they're out in the world, they're hands-on with people, they're going to be with SE and FE together, like, whoa, charismatic. And they also have enough sort of adapted extroverted thinking to be structured to get through things. And of course, with introverted thinking, they have some pretty solid analytics. The introverted thinking is not super strong. It's not as much as the second class of ESTP we'll talk about, but it's there, of course. So what is interesting is that extroverted intuiting and introverted feeling are last. So they are like, they have these people skills and they're active and out in the world and all of that, but the side of them that could be, I would say like more just like in the sky and like, ooh, imagine these possibilities, and then the part where like, who am I really deep down, and what is my identity, and his emotions come up in different situations, like what does this tell me, my conscience and all of that, like that's not on their mind, even though they are quite multi-talented anyways, because the holistic version of any type tends to be more multi-talented. They're probably getting their growth needs met, their emotional needs met through other people, through their relationships, and they have decent introverted intuiting. So there's a vision there. There is a creative drive and an interest in growth, as long as it's grounded in something practical or experiential. They're not very good with introverted sensing, so they're not great with routine. They're just sort of a little bit of a wild card in any situation, which I think ESTPs would probably like to hear. I think in the broader type community, people talk a lot about looping, and I haven't talked that so much in these videos, but I do see it quite a bit. And so this is a chance to go in and talk about it when you have the first and the third function working a lot together. And this is an example. So the high extroverted sensing and extroverted feeling, like they're all out there. And I think they're a great example of it. People are everywhere. So even if you're just the kind of extroverted sensing, it's like, I like doing physical activities and this and that, they're going to be playing sports. They're going to be involved with people in those activities. And even if they're not like the most people oriented person in the world, they're gonna be like, hey, great to meet you, and like, let's do our stuff, whatever it is. And so I think that is where that comes in, and that looping also is probably what it makes it difficult to like have the personal time to like really introspect and like be quiet and that kind of thing, like inside of themselves. I think a great example of this would be someone who, say, builds a fitness business. So they're very active, they're physically active, they have to be responsive in the moment. So they need to be tactical, they're tools based. And if you think of fitness not as just a business, but like, why am I doing this? It's like, well, I want people to be fit. I want to stay fit. I meet a lot of SPs, by the way, who do physical stuff with people as part of seeing that is essential to personal growth. It could be something like personalized medicine. It doesn't necessarily have to be fitness. It could be like the ESTP who opens like a vitamin business. Like, why are they doing this? Is because their introverted intuiting is like, has this little small voice that's like, let's do growth and like personal growth, and like have a vision for the person of themselves getting better. I remember right when I moved to LA to work at UCLA many years ago, and I went and got a trainer who was an ESTP, an aspiring actor, and I thought this was all like, he was a great example, thinking way back, of this kind of person. I mean, he really took seriously like, let's help you get better at like working out, and like, what are your goals and that kind of thing. Very no nonsense, still ESTP, but like very much and acting, of course, is also very much a people business. I think there's a kind of person, the kind of ESTP that also has a variety of side projects, like they sort of couldn't help it. And for them, a side project could be something like having a clothing line that's branded that goes along with their fitness business. And that requires a lot of like being on top of details, and like the FE is and SE are both involved in like marketing. What is the best look, and how do we communicate with people, and let's me call somebody and make some kind of deal with them to make sure we can do this. And then I think what's cool about this version is that they do have the spiritual side, because NI is there in the middle, and they're probably not going to talk about spiritual things out of the blue. But if you raise the question, or it's the right context, because extroverted sensing is about like, let's stay with the context. This is a great divider, by the way, with extroverted intuiting. Extroverted intuiting is always like, yeah, let me bring in all of these different things from different facets of life into this one thing. And the SE person is like, what are you doing? Like, I don't see how this is related to that at all. Like, let's just do this. Like, there's so much to do inside of this. Like, let's just do this. So I think that when you ping that spiritual side of them, then they're like, oh yeah, I've thought about that. Like, I do have that side to me. And they're very much, I would say, like, a lot of it is the classic ESTP, not the classic you're going to meet in business, which is the second more analytic version.
Yeah, so it seems like this version really sticks to the context in terms of the extroverted sensing is very zoned in and they're very go-getter and they do a lot of things. And so I'm still letting it all sink in. So you mentioned the context of looping,
Mm.
and Dario's way of seeing it is the tricycle model. So what's in the research of the people who make these cognitive function assessments and have a lot of people take these assessments online is that they notice that um, the first, the second, and the sixth function are very strong in people in general. And so one of the findings from this assessment is that the first, the second, and the sixth are actually very strong cognitive functions in people's psyche. People can very skillfully use their sixth function. It
Mhm.
may not be as valued as the top three functions for some people, but it can definitely be skillfully used. So,
Yeah, and I would emphasize, when I think about people who are, say, teenagers or in college, the sixth function is often not something yet that is well developed. It's clearly something that comes later. I think, though, it does depend on the context. So if the sixth function happens to be extroverted thinking or extroverted feeling, or maybe introverted sensing, which are like the cultural norms, like the most common, the person's probably going to develop them earlier. Otherwise, they're going to develop them a little bit later. And then, along with the first, second, and sixth, the third is still there, usually in the top four, the top half out of eight, and there are, like, out of the different classes, like, even though tricycle model does make up a fair number of people, I don't remember now the number because I haven't looked at it in a while. I think it's like 45%. But there's another group of people that's almost as big where you see the first and the third also pretty aligned with each other, and that is then bringing in this idea of looping. And I think it's very easy to engage in looping in an extroverted culture when your third function is something that is already in demand. So think of like a female ESTP who's been like getting all this cultural feedback, social feedback. You should be doing extroverted feeling. You should be doing extroverted feeling. And she's like, oh, like, it's not too hard to do extroverted feeling. Like, okay, let me just do more of that. Um, and so then I think that what happens is that shuts out the other stuff. Uh, but at least in this here, we're looking at numbers that cut across all of the different age cohorts. So it's like all different people of all different ages. Um, so it's really sort of neat to think that there isn't just one way that people develop, that it really depends upon the context and the culture, and that people say looping is a thing and other people say looping is not a thing, and I'm like, well, actually, for some people it is a big thing and for other people it's not.
mm, when you pay attention to the nurture, it really changes things. Like
Yes.
the studies done in psychology say that nurture makes up approximately 50% of your personality. So that's a huge portion to not overlook. So
Mm.
and then I'm curious about the other variation of ESTP. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, so I would say that this is a more like analytic version of ESTP, that is, and we see this with a lot of types, that they're basically specializing in their function pair. So they're just like sensing thinking. That's their shtick. It doesn't matter introverted, extroverted. Yes, they have extroverted sensing strongest, but they also could be easily mistaken for, in some situations, for ISTP or ESTJ, because they've just doubled down on sensing and thinking in all of its varieties. Um, and again, so this version is going to be leading with extroverted sensing, so active and hands-on and adaptable, but a lot more not just business-like, but big business-like. Because after the extroverted sensing, TE and TI, are both very strong. And the thinking is just very strong in general. And they have enough FE and NE to sort of like, yeah, even NE. And we've talked about this in some other videos, like the eighth function. And John Beebe has talked about this. The first and the eighth are not 100% mutually exclusive. In fact, they do find common grounds where they cross over. They can engage, like think of a business setting. You're going to have a meeting. We need to do brainstorming in the meeting. The extroverted sensing type is like, okay, let me do some brainstorming. They engage socially, but these are not their strengths. They're going to come off as more analytical and probably less extroverted and certainly less diverse in their interest than the holistic ESTP. Their idea of being diverse is like telling a joke. They're comfortable in a big business setting. They can stick to schedules. They're going to meetings. They meet meet with their deadlines. They're attending to metrics. There is also a pushy version of this that is quite a bit of, I want to say, like yang energy, big business. So think of like Donald Trump as an example. And I think this is an example because some people say, oh, he's ESTP. Other people say he's ESTJ. I'm like, first of all, I use temperament theory, and he very clearly is improviser, like artisan temperament. So you just match that up and you're like, okay, ESTP. ESTPs also have very directive style. And this version of ESTP, this analytic version, definitely has this more directive, no nonsense kind of style. It's they're not as like fun loving and carefree as the holistic ESTP, the first version, but they're still like, okay, go along to get along. Everything is still about the bottom line at the end of the day, though. And I should mention, by the way, that even though I say that they're focused on sensing and thinking in general, still introverted sensing is going to be like their last place that they're going to go to within sensing and thinking. So they're much more, as a business person, about being like, how can we set up a schedule or system so that you get things done for me? And that is because they, at the end of the day, they have a limited tolerance. They know what routine is. They know what details are. And they're like, yeah, I got a limited tolerance for those. And I'm not all into that. So there's just like this hardcore analytic element. And it's interesting because of the extroverted sensing, and they're not necessarily going to be sitting there philosophizing and stuff like that, but they do have their principles that they're working from, and they really are strongly guided by those. And I'm not talking about moral and ethical principles. I'm talking about business principles. Like, what are like the different angles you can approach a negotiation? That is like way in front of their mind, and just like automatically rolls off the tongue, so to speak, and happens very easily for them. What is interesting then is we want to look at the weak part. Introverted intuiting, also introverted feeling. So anything that's woo-woo, anything that's introspective, that's like way at the bottom of the stack for them. Even something like, so the holistic ESTP would go to like an ayahuasca ceremony, for example. That they have a spiritual life that they realize is different from the way they do other things. This ESTP is like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Like, you can tell me about your experience. Like, I got 3 minutes. But they themselves are not going to do that. Really, the spirituality is much more centered through the introspection, through the introverted thinking, and their relations with other people. And if an introverted feeling is funny because we think of that as like personal identity and values and beliefs. And most people can state what their values and beliefs are, but that's not really so much what introverted feeling is. Introverted feeling is like, this is going on in my life. My conscience is telling me something. Feelings are coming up. Let me reflect upon those feelings and what they say about how I could respond or be a different person or more of my own true self in the situation. This ESTP is like, yeah, you go to have fun in your workshop. Like, that's not what we're about here. And this is a just much more hardcore analytical version of ESTP.
Yeah, what it sounds like is this version of ESTP is more Enneagram 8-ish, where they're no nonsense, get to the bottom line. They're very direct, very forward, and um, a straight shooter is what it sounds
Mhm,
like,
mhm,
and not into the woo woo. Whereas the holistic ESTP sounds a little bit more Enneagram 7 like,
mhm.
where they're having that fun, where they're more open minded, where they are um, more into like the jovialness of life. And
Yeah,
so that's interesting to add there too.
yeah.
Um,
I think a great way to tell is that the holistic ESTP is gonna be more expressive, emotionally expressive, and you can tell whether or not they're having fun in what they're doing. The second version, more hardcore analytic ESTP, is a lot less expressive, and you may not be really sure whether they're having fun or not unless they tell you.
mm, makes sense. They're a little harder to read. Yeah, because showing your emotions shows some vulnerability or weakness, and the
Mhm.
analytic ESTP may not be as comfortable showing you their weakness or vulnerability. They need to appear a little stronger.
Yeah,
And
yeah. It's
so
always about I'm the best at it. I mean, I'm exaggerating in this case. This is one person in particular we're thinking of that everyone in America knows. But yeah, it's just it's actually tough for them to go there.
yes. And so I'm curious about the ESFPs, if you don't have more to add about the ESTP.
I think we're good on ESTP. Yeah. I'll start like we did before with holistic. It's a holistic ESFP. Very clear example of ESFP, dominant extroverted sensing, plus introverted feeling, of course, and also strong extroverted feeling. I've heard this multiple times from ESFPs, that very much they describe, especially when they were younger. They're like, oh, I'm so caught up in what's going on with other people and other people's emotions and other people's drama and this and that. And they say it took me quite a while to just like stand back from all of that and figure out who am I and what am I about. And I think some of that is introverted feeling and some of that is introverted intuiting, but I think this is a really good example that highlights all of the people who talk about in ENFPs as well, who talk about like needing to separate other people's needs from their own needs, because actually the sixth function comes into play a bit, even as introverted feeling there is there also. They have decent access to intuition, introverted intuiting, yes, and also some extroverted intuiting. So they're going to come off as artistic, as creative, as entertaining ideas. Like, don't get too abstract or like too weird about it. But I think a great example would be um, like someone in theater. So we are doing this theater kind of stuff, and theater has a lot of NFs as well as SPs and SFPs in particular. And so there's this creative element, this abstract element that goes along with the practical part of acting. So this is person is very outgoing, they're sociable, they're active, they're creative. They're not much for sticking to rules. Notice I didn't mention thinking at all because thinking is at the very bottom. Both forms of thinking ranked from first to eighth. They're seventh and eighth. Like this is not a thinking oriented person. It's like what? There's a schedule. There's a routine. No, they're disorganized. They're unstructured. They're not particularly academic or intellectual at all, unless they can see it or interact with it concretely or it gives an emotional vibe. They're not interested, and that's where the abstract stuff comes in. So like an NFJ, for example, is maybe a colleague of theirs, friend, brings an introverted intuiting, but because they're also bringing a lot of feeling with it, this ESFP is like, okay, yeah, I can vibe with this. Like we're doing the feeling part, and then there's this other like introverted intuiting, which they're not totally disconnected from. Just don't get like too heady and too nerdy and just abstract and technical. The problem solving they do is all through and with people and all hands-on trial and error. And even if they're doing something like brainstorming or learning something about type, They want to have some aha moments. They're still asking, like, what is telling me about this? And like, can I learn with my friends? Can I learn with somebody who's interesting and engaging and who gives examples? So they're very much about vibe and emotions and relationships, and then like all the activities that we're going to do around that. And this doesn't have to be theater. Like, I think another great example is social work. So social work, what does it require? It requires extroverted sensing. I mean, if you're any good at your job, and you're going to be maybe more like hands-on version of social work, where you're like working at a center where you're meeting with people who come in every day and they need help with whatever it is. You don't know what they need help from each day to the next. And this ESFP is totally fine with that. Oh, you need a bus ticket. You need like food vouchers. You need like a little bit of counseling. You need like some stuff that's about like, drug abuse. Like, they're just going to respond to that. And the feeling function in both of its forms needs to be there in order to do that well. What they don't need is like sitting in front of a computer doing like data analysis. It's not going to interest them at all. And so that's, I would say that this is in many ways like a stereotypical version of ESFP, this sort of holistic version.
I can see that. Hmm. And I guess what would help me with understanding this is also seeing its contrast with the other type of ESFP you have in mind as well, too. So
Yeah. So I'm actually going to talk about three kinds of ESFPs, even though the third one is a very small percentage, like 4% of just general SE users. So probably like 2%. No, that's incorrect. Like 8% of ESFPs. But we'll talk about this analytic version first. The analytic version is, of course, still big SE first users, still like action responsive oriented in the moment. But they also have a lot of SI. In fact, what should be their fifth function is actually second in terms of skillful use. And I don't want to emphasize that. As long as we're talking about all of this is about development, this is about skillful use. That doesn't mean they love SI or it comes naturally or whatever it is. It's probably so well practiced that it just like boop comes out without even thinking of it. And their extroverted feeling eclipses their introverted feeling. So they still have sensing and feeling are like pretty top up there, but it really is there is this like, I want to say like inner ESFJ or inner parent. And because ESFJ is such like a strong type in the general population, that of course this is going to come out. And this person is basically saying like, I need to adapt to the business world. I need to adapt to having a routine. Like, I want to imagine, like, say you're an ESFP and you were this former, like, fun-loving, holistic. I was in theater in college, and like we went to parties and road trips and like did all of these fun things, jumping off of bungee jumping. Um, and then they get married. They need to have a steady job. They have kids. They start going to church or doing something with their community. Uh, wow, all of a sudden there isn't room for any of these other things in their life that would be like the fun loving holistic things. And especially in the business environment, it's really you just got to have those more routine, more metrics, more doing things how they're supposed to be done. So it's just very solid sensing. They don't do a ton of thinking. Both of the thinking functions are in the bottom half. They're not as allergic to thinking as the holistic version is, because they're like, probably there's a practical element of thinking, the extroverted thinking, which is like, okay, I need to have like a calendar filled out and like a schedule, and the kids need to be on time and all of that. And then there's even some introverted thinking, because it's like, oh, well, there are these training courses I need to take in order to do my job better. So let me absorb like these different concepts that are there and have to do some problem solving. But pretty much it's just solid sensing. Do not come to this person for thinking or intuiting. So they're very people oriented. They can be like, yeah, like the extrovert intuiting, how might that show up for them? Because it's sort of in the middle. Some like telling fun stories, going to the amusement park, doing creative decorating for the holidays. Even some like quirky, wacky decorating for the holidays. Like they have the side to them that's a little bit different. I'm not going to say like normie ESFP, but they're sort of in that direction, and they can come off as ESFJ. And I would say that it's not that they don't do introverted feeling as well as they could, but that introverted feeling gets repressed. Like their own needs, their own feelings, those sort of are going to get pushed down a little bit, just like the analytic ESTP, because there's not really room for that in the workplace, unless they have like some, like, oh wow, how did I have two NJ children? Unless that happens, they're not going to be doing a ton of introverted intuiting either. So really is just like, here's my routine, and here's the way I'm living my life. And like this SI, like I got these skills here, like I'm flowing in this, please don't disrupt. They're a busy, responsible member of society. They go to their work, they bring home the bacon, they go to church, they take care of their community, like whatever it is, and they can be mistaken for, I know I said it, but for ESFJ. Um, and I think it's just, you have to keep in mind that they're extroverted sensing first. And as long as you are engaging them that way, and usually if you talk to them, they're going to be like, yeah, there's some side craft projects I like to do. I would love to go on a road trip again. And you hear about their past before they had all these responsibilities, and their past seems really wild.
And so the dominant function is what determines the type the most. And so that's a good emphasis to put upon it. So, what the research that Dario Nardi has collected has shown the most definitively is that the 8 cognitive functions exist and that the dominant function is definitely a thing. And so, yeah, that's super important when figuring out someone's psychological type. And so I'm curious about this mysterious third subtype of ESFP. Can you
Mhm.
elucidate this rare animal?
Yeah. So this is really, I would say, like there's holistic and analytical versions. And then within the analytical version, we're going to talk about a version that is a little bit different from the one that I just talked about. They're like a more like upscale version of the analytic one that we talked about, because they're not just leaning into SJ, the cultural norm, and having to manage all of these things in their life that are the expected things we all have to do. They're leaning into their opposite type, which is, NTJ. And so there is a little bit, I would say, like a great example is the executive assistant. And this is a version that I have met a couple of times in my life and worked with them. Um, so they do extroverted sensing, and they get some introverted feeling in there. And of course, it's in the top 4. They're doing extroverted thinking, and then they got like a bunch of other stuff that is there. And what you don't see so much of is, again, the extroverted intuiting is not so strong. Extroverted feeling even is cooler. They're less expressive. They're not into like, let's make a metaphor for this, like the theater version of ESFP. You're going to encounter them in the business environment, like the previous version, but they're a little bit more about stepping up. And that's why I say like the executive assistant is a great example. So I worked with this gal. So we shared an office, and she was ESFP, and she knew about type. And she, in fact, she saw all my students and everything all the time because she worked on the other side of the office. And she was really great in handling whatever came up on that day. And she was just such a machine when she was at the office. Stuff comes in and the stuff goes out, and oh, this other thing is coming in, and oh, these 3 over things over here, and she was so relaxed with it and all of that. And yet she was also very open-minded at the same time. So she was very curious about like, oh, what are you doing in your class? And this was also because this is a big room, we use this as lab space for students when they put on their robot plays. And by the way, the whole idea of putting human and robot plays, and this was 20 years ago before we had like AI like we do now. Still, there were some pretty decent robots. It was an ESFP student who was the holistic version, who was a theater student. And she was like, why don't we put on plays with the robots? And I'm like, that is an amazing idea. Like, let's do that. But anyway, so we shared the space, and she was an amazing executive assistant. Like, she was able to get stuff done that literally the person she worked for, she wasn't my assistant. I was like working for the Center for Governance, and she was the assistant for the lead, the director for the center. So this person is like, and by the way, she had like quirky, like multicolored hair and like all these things that would distinguish her as being this artisan SP type, and just of course like interacting with her day to day, minding the to-do list, and yet also aware of the broader society, a lot of responsibilities, did pretty well in school, and the analytic version of ESFP does well in school. Spirituality is further off the road, but it's not one of those like, oh, please, like, let's not get into that. They really are like, you set the context or they ask a question, and they're just, it's something sort of low key. So they're a little bit in between maybe the analytic and holistic. They're definitely more on the analytic side because they're really just managing a whole lot from day to day, but they have this creativity to them that also branches to the other one, and this openness. And they're really, really good at learning. So they're the kind of ESFP also would be like, I'm going back to graduate school and I'm going to get a degree in, and that degree is not accounting or nursing or something practical like the purely analytic version would take, nor is it going to be theater or social work. And just that, like the holistic version is like, let me do like a graduate program in education and learn about education theory, or let me do a graduate program in media technology. And not just because of performing and whatever, but like there's going to be like theory, and there's going to be research projects, and there's going to be this, all of these things which I think bring out the best of the two different sides normally of ESFP. And I suspect that if we were to go through for all of the types and ask beyond these two big classes, who are these like little small clusters? I think that those clusters are more than just random examples, that there are probably a number of those micro clusters that represent really like, showing up as your best kind of version, ESFP.
Yeah, showing up as your best version is a nice way to put it. And so it seems like these two broader categories, holistic and analytic, can be broken down into micro categories that can be quite big depending on the type as well too.
Mhm.
So that's a pretty cool subcategory understandings.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, and I think for this particular version that we talked about, this 4%, um, that unless you point them into the obvious directions first, like emphasizing, like, let's look at the 8 functions, let's look at extroverted sensing and get them really grounded in that, they might actually be confused about what their type is. Just like the holistic version of ESFP is probably going to score as an ENFP, or INFP or something like that, or ENFJ, because they're, just more like, they're just more that connected. And the other version of ESTP, the analytic version, could easily score as ESFJ or even as a thinking type, because they're just going to probably not so much as a thinking type unless they feel like, oh, this is how I'm supposed to respond, because there is that introverted sensing, this is my role, this is how I'm supposed to respond. But this version here that's in between could easily be like, well, yeah, I could be an INFJ, and I'm not just making that up. Like, this is an actual example of an ESFP, before like really sorting through type and being like, oh yeah, I'm not an INFJ. I'm an ESFP. I'm just like this weird version of ESFP. And I'm like, no, you're just leaning into your opposite type, but you're still hanging on strongly to your preferred functions and to feeling, and there you are. And that's is perfectly cool.
yeah, a part of development is sometimes embracing that opposite type. We have a episode on anima and animus, and a part of one's type journey is almost embodying the energy of the type that has the same functions as you and in an opposite-ish order.
Mhm.
So, all
Yeah.
right.
And I would add to that, this is a good opportunity to mention that the point here, because it's asking about skillful use, that these are not like smaller boxes to look for. It's not like, oh, you're a holistic ESFP and that's what you are for all of your life from birth until death. That a person could be the holistic version of ESFP when they're younger, or ESTP, and then the weight of responsibilities and culture and life, and they're just like, okay, I'm going to buckle under, or like really get to work here, and they're going to become an analytic version of ESFP over a number of years, and they look back 20 years and they're like, ah, yeah, I used to be different. And then something will happen at midlife or whatever it is that maybe reconnects them with their anima or animus, and they're like, okay, now let me go in the direction of my opposite type, not just in the direction of the culture. And then they become like a more actualized version of themselves.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Actualization is a form of nurture development as well too, in a way. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so type, one of the benefits of knowing type is that it helps us with quickening the self-actualization process too. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Dario Nardi, for this excellent talk on the categories or flavors of the extroverted sensing dominant types. And so people can understand why they mistype themselves, that they're a subcategory of the holistic or analytic version of these types, and everything makes sense, and that
Mhm.
they're not crazy, and that now they can be at peace. So
Mhm. Mhm.
if you enjoyed today's talk, also feel free to check out the Young for Life event. We would love to see you there. And at that event, you might even figure out if you are the analytic or holistic version of your type. So, mystery solved if
Mhm.
you join us. Kidding. So, well, it's true.
No, I mean, come for a brain imaging session, and then you'll really know, even in much more detail, than which one of those two. Like, go down to the level of 4 or even 12. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you all in the next episode.
Yes. Thank you.